call the planning meeting for December the 27th to order. Have a roll call, please.
Mr. Cappers, Mayor, Mr. Wolke,
Here.
Mr. Titterington,
Here.
Mrs. Mahan, Mr. McGarry,
Here.
Mr. Force.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, everyone had a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting. Have a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Second?
Are you all in favor?
Aye.
The next thing on the agenda is the Kettering Health Network located at 600 West Main Street. Approval of final development plan, which confirms the original general plan. The commission can make the recommendation.
Mr. Chair, this is the final site development plan that does conform to what you and City Council had both approved earlier as a preliminary. The final design of the parking lots and buildings has been worked out now and is completed here on the plan. It's ready for your review.
Okay, the only question I have now, I understand that we're not going to be able to put a basement in.
Yes, the design always had been made for a building at grade level, and basement had never been included in the design work.
Oh, it never been designed. Okay. Anyone else in council have a comment, question?
Jim, is the parking that we see on the drawing, is that the final parking for the building, or are they going to be utilizing the other two lots that Hobart used across on the north side of Water Street?
For the design of the building that they have and the employment that they expect, the parking lot that you see that's being built now is meeting the requirements of the usual zoning code. They do have overflow parking, which will be available in those other two lots that they own, but they are not actually needed at this time to meet the minimum parking standards.
Okay.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion?
This is part A, right? I'll
Yeah,
move we
part A.
approve. Yeah, I'll move we approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Titterington,
Yes.
Mrs. Mahan,
Yes.
Mr. McGarry,
Yes.
Mr. Force,
Yes.
Mr. Wolke.
Yes.
It's approved.
Okay, the second part B is a review of the record plan. A report on that.
Mr. Chairman, you have before you a preliminary layout of additional right-of-way that the city has requested and has been partially designed by the applicant's engineers. There are a couple of minor areas that need to be adjusted perhaps to accommodate future traffic control devices that have not been designed at this point. So this is a preliminary layout of the additional right-of-way that would be needed. What's shaded on your plan in yellow is additional right-of-way that does not exist at this time, and that would be dedicated to the public. As I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of areas where some of those lines would need to be adjusted to provide a little more space for traffic control devices. And the engineers are working with each other at this point to determine how much and where those things would be.
So you're suggesting it would be premature to pass this on to council at this point?
I know that it's not the actual, this, Jill Rhodes, is this like commission?
Yes.
Okay, Jill Rhodes downstairs, city engineer. I know that you don't actually have the final record plat in front of you, but we feel confident that us working with the engineers, we just need another iteration. So when we talk about needing a little bit extra right-of-way, honestly, it's just at the corners, and it's going to be, I envision less than, a 15 by 15 square. And so what we actually did, because we're right at Christmas time, they gave us an iteration. We're looking at it right now with our consultants, and then we were going to give it back to them. But we have verbally actually talked about what we needed, and the designers for KHN have been agreeable, as well as I believe Mr. Chitterington had a conversation with KHN last week just to talk about the concept. So actually what you see isn't actually what exists out in the street right now. It's just a little bit more detail than what to add to Jim, what Jim provided. That's actually the conceptual plan for what we plan to do on West Main in front of their development. So adding, there's additional widths, there's a right drop lane, so that's where we kind of need that additional right of way. So I feel confident. I recommend that it goes contingent approval that, the additional right of way, once we get the final record plat, which we expect in the next week. But that's, we request that you approve it, but that's ultimately
So
your
we'd
guys'
be making
decision.
a conditional recommendation? Is that what you're saying?
I would say conditional upon us getting the final, that we negotiate and get the final record plat. So obviously you guys don't have the final record plat right now, so once we get the final record plat.
So you're recommending we go ahead and approve it the way it is? And maybe, Mr. Walker said, conditional?
I'm recommending that you go ahead and approve conditional that we get the additional right-of-way, that we work out the final plan, because I think we will, the right-of-way that you see today plus the additional for the future traffic control devices.
But would part of that then, if the staff did not get that final right-of-way, then it would have to come back to the planning commission?
Most certainly.
So the administration is okay with that?
Yes, we are. I mean, it is only a question, if you look at the corners, where there is a question about where any kind of mast arms would be for stoplights. So it's not an issue, it's just not yet reflected on there, and the traffic engineers are working out exactly what the positioning might be on new mast arms. And so it may or may not require a small amount of right-of-way. In discussions verbally, everybody has agreed to it, so it's not a matter of any kind of conflict, it's just a matter of the traffic engineers coming up with the final
Putting the maps.
final drawing.
Yeah, and dimensions and things like that.
I've got a question, it may not affect the right-of-way,
Okay?
but the drawing may answer the question anyway. I know there's been discussion about future plans for Water Street, but when you're heading east on Water Street, approaching Adams Street, there's a drawing, it does show that there's, I assume, a left-hand turn lane now that's going to be put in
Water Street?
on Water Street.
We had not-
That's always been a problem when you're heading off of Elm Street, heading over to Water Street. When you get one car that's going to make a north turn on
I
Adams,
see what you're saying right here, yeah.
you sit through the entire cycle, sometimes through 2 cycles.
I think that there is existing asphalt width. The width is sufficient to do that now. We just haven't. So I'll put that as a note. Because it would just be restricting a little bit of parking probably, but I haven't worked with our
Right,
consultants.
but the off-street parking, that doesn't count for their parking requirements, right?
Right.
That'd be, I mean, I just.
It'd be on-street
I just think
parking when
it'd
I
be
say
great if you could make that
modification.
change now,
Yeah.
because it's, I mean, for 20 years, that's been a problem.
There is looks like a line that they drew here.
Right, but it doesn't exist out there right now.
No, it doesn't exist now.
Right,
No, if you could do that, that would be great. I'd sure appreciate it.
yes.
Any other comments? Not, do we have a motion? Larry, you wanna
I'll
make
let you word it. I'll let you word it.
That's why I'm not making a motion yet. Okay, I will make a motion that this be recommended to the city council, subject to agreement by staff and the petitioners. Will that get it done?
Related to what agreement?
Regarding right-of-way.
Okay.
No good?
Another second?
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call?
Mrs. Mahan,
Yes.
Mr. McGarry,
Yes.
Mr. Force,
Yes.
Mr. Wolke,
Yes.
Mr. Titlery.
Yes.
The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Okay, the third thing on the agenda today is review of downtown riverfront overlay district. The commission is to make a determination of whether or not to hold a public meeting and make a recommendation to council. So staff have a report?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. This is a proposal for a new overlay district that would be very similar to the existing overlay districts that you're familiar with for historic preservation that we have, and also for flood damage prevention. The idea came out of a year-long study that's been going on of our downtown and riverfront and possible revitalization of the area. And one of the proposals was that a new zoning district would be needed to actually allow for redevelopments of very small lots, narrow areas that exist in downtown, and of course, buildings that had been designed over 100 years ago for different types of uses than are practical today. So what staff is proposing is an overlay district that could be used when an applicant for a renovation of a building is unable to make it fit within the existing standards of the zoning code. And looking at the map of downtown, you'll see that there are 11 different zoning districts with 11 different sets of rules. So this would provide an alternative for those new redevelopment projects that would fit under one standard. The concept is that council would create the district, provide the district boundaries that this would be applicable for, and then each proposal that would utilize this process would need to submit its own redevelopment site plan to you, very similar to what you see with the plans that come for changes in the historic district. This would be a larger district, however, and would include renovations, additions to buildings, things that would make the existing area much more amenable to the uses that we want to propose in future as opposed to those of years gone by.
Anyone have any questions?
I noticed on every page it says draft. Is this ready to go, or is this something that you're suggesting needs more work?
Staff and our law director and some of our consultants have also looked at this, and we're ready to submit it to you and send it forward to you for your review, and then hopefully on to City Council with your recommendation. At that point, it would no longer be a draft.
Is this something that was created here in the city of Troy, or did you borrow this concept from somewhere else?
Borrowed from several places, and also modeled very closely after our existing M1 planned industrial zoning district that we've had in place for quite some time. So it uses elements of our existing code as well as some of the ideas that the consultants provided to us from elsewhere.
So provided that a proposal meets the requirements as outlined in this district, the planning commission would be, I won't say the final authority, because I guess it can go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, but council would not be involved at all in this process, is that correct?
That's correct, just as is true for the historic district or the flood district.
And the Board of Zoning Appeals could hear any rejection or modification that we make by a 2/3 vote override us, is that correct?
They could override, yes, because the action of planning commission is an administrative function, and those can be appealed through the appeals process to the BZA.
But again, if somebody has something that they want to do, and it meets the criteria of their underlying conventional zoning district, then the planning commission has nothing to do with that.
That's correct.
It's just a simple administrative application process.
The concept was to provide an alternative when it was necessary. However, at the same time, to not take away any of the existing rights that property owners already have under their existing zoning. So a project, for instance, a modification of a building that would fit within the existing standards of whatever of the 11 zoning districts already exist, could be issued a permit just as it has been done in the past. However, if because of our modern zoning code restrictions, there would be a problem fitting a building onto a small lot, for instance, this process would provide for that specific site plan redevelopment review by the Planning Commission.
As I understand it, this has been reviewed by Mr. Cappers, and he's okay with what we have here?
Mr. Cappers did take a look at it, had a couple of suggestions, which we did incorporate as well. Mr. Kerber, our law director, similarly had looked through it and had some suggestions which were incorporated. So it's gone through several iterations to get to this point.
Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, if I could. I just wanted to clarify, there was discussions on the language of this up through this afternoon, and I know there was a comment about this not being a draft or not. I don't know what the Planning Commission has in front of it and whether or not those changes have been, there were some discussion topics that made this afternoon, and I just wanted to be clear that that's been forwarded to the Planning Commission as far as that, because I know that, and I don't, because I wanted to answer the question of whether or not that was a draft or not. And I don't know the answer to that.
You don't know if this is a draft or not?
Right. I haven't been part of any communications with the Planning Commission, and I know that there's been some discussions up through this afternoon with regard to the final language on it.
And
I just
so,
want to
I
be
guess,
clear on
what-
that.
yeah, I would probably just stay here,
All
if you
right.
would, please. And so, what Mr. Kerber's talking about is, he mentions that in one point, we need to clarify that the plan should be on file with the Secretary of the Planning Commission, that it should specify that the Planning Commission should issue the decision in writing. There's some clarification things that he put in there. There were a couple of other ones, though, Grant, that you had mentioned in an earlier phone call that they may not, the rest of the planning commission may not be aware of just because of how quickly things have been going, but they weren't monumental, but of course, you should know what Mr. Kerber is recommending. So if you could clarify that for us.
Well, and I'm not sure which ones you're referring to. If you want to, I didn't bring my notes up here with me. I know that there were some changes made on Friday, and I looked at those. Those were incorporated. I don't know what draft has been presented to the Planning Commission. From the Planning Commission packet that went out on Friday, there were probably, I want to say at least 4 or 5 different suggested changes at that point in time. One talked about who had the rights to make appeals. That was one
of
area.
them. And then the other, and so appeals to the BZA would be restricted to the applicant or the property owner. So it wouldn't be, I think at one point we had interested party in there, which was vague.
So they would have to have standing.
They would have to have standing. The other one, beyond the ones that I just listed, was
The one had to do with
the timing of being able to go to the BZA.
essentially to prevent people from asking over and over substantially the same application.
It'd be a 6-month delay before they.
Right, but it was in the wrong section. It really said before it could be brought to the BZA, it really should be that an applicant can't bring the substantially same application to the Planning Commission within 6 months, and that needed to be that needed to be changed.
Is there an urgency for us to act on this today?
Well, and so that's why, the other reason I asked Mr. Kerber to stay up at the podium. The staff had recommended, or has recommended in the memo, that the Planning Commission consider approving or recommending to council this legislation as emergency legislation. Mr. Kerber has some concerns about it, and I'll let him talk about that. With regards to the urgency, the only urgency is, and the reason that the staff asked for the emergency legislation is that we know that there are 1, 2, or more developments that are waiting to occur. And so from the staff perspective, we just wanted to show that a willingness to further this conversation as quickly as we can and get it resolved as much as possible. But Mr. Kerber has some concerns about including emergency legislation, which is fine. We defer to him on that. Keep in mind that as this is a change to the zoning code, there will have to be 3 readings and a public hearing in front of the city council. So it's not as if this would be suspended and passed by 3rd reading should council want to, because by state law they cannot. But having said that, I'd ask Mr. Kerber to explain his concerns with the emergency designation.
Well, sure. I mean, it's more of a legalistic approach, as well as, and given that this is more of a systemic change to the zoning code, rather than being a sort of a one-off, one applicant, where there might be an emergency basis for a particular situation. It's more of a general type of systemic change to the zoning code. That certainly represents a concern that I have in designating this as an emergency.
An emergency is not subject to referendum.
That's correct. And that certainly, I mean, there's, my approach is not so much the policy. I don't make the decisions and the determination of what constitutes that, but, from a legalistic standpoint, you have to, try to look on the other side, what sort of challenges might come.
I guess I'm a little uneasy with this, because I'm not sure that everybody's on the same page here.
No, I agree. I mean, if this was an individual piece of property or an individual case, and they had to close between now and the end of the year for a specific project we were looking at, but I haven't even digested a lot of this. I mean, I've been pretty busy like everybody else in the last 4 days, so I'd like time to look at it again and then have at least a larger group of the members present when we discuss it.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we table this item until the next meeting.
Sounds good.
I'll second.
Second?
Second.
Mr. McGarry.
Yes.
Mr. Force.
Yes.
Mr. Wolke.
Yes.
Mr. Titterington.
Yes.
Mrs. Mahan.
Yes.
The item is tabled.
Okay, is there any other?
Just to say, we'll bring the final without the draft designation on it and remove it from the table, hopefully next meeting.
Okay. And if I could, I would like to thank Mr. Force for the many, many years of service that you provided this community.
Thank you. That it? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.